Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. So it's about 1 a.m. Don't know why I'm still awake, but what I like to do is I like to read about kids being, when kids have imaginary friends, but it's like, is this an imaginary friend or is this actually a demon or is this a ghost or whatever? I was reading one of those threads on Reddit and then I decided right now, oh, why don't I just put on the camera and then, oh, there you go, content. And also, I have a sponsor to do. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives where millions come together to take the next step in their creative journey. Skillshare offers thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people on topics including illustration, design, photography, video, freelancing, and more. Skillshare is accessible to all types of people, no matter what learning level you are at, from beginners like you to masters at everything like me. We can all learn new stuff whenever we feel like, classes to fit our individual schedules. And most of the classes are only under 60 minutes, which is perfect for people like me with terrible attention spans. Time. What is time? Does it really exist? No one actually knows. But what we do know is time is what we make of it. So why not sign up for a Skillshare class today and make the most of time? And do you know what? There's loads of classes to suit whatever creative itch you have itching away on your body as time erodes us all. The class that I'm looking at this month, right, because I've decided I should probably take this whole career thing a little bit more seriously. Creating a modern cinematic documentary film with Soul by Dan Liu. Oh yes, I too am going to live out my own dream of becoming as great a director as Shane Dawson. And remember, unlike my YouTube videos, Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, which means there are no ads. Aren't you lucky? And with an annual subscription, it comes out to less than $10 per month. What a bargain. Massive savings.
By Grabthar's hammer. What a savings.
The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the special link in the description box will get a free trial of a premium membership. So give it a bash, you might learn something new. Thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Now let's read about children being really creepy. I don't know why I do these types of things to myself. Why I read these types of things at 1 a.m, 2 a.m. I've always done that. Always, sat on a computer until 3 a.m. Being young or whatever. Reading about the paranormal. What's the scariest story you heard a child tell about their imaginary friend? Now remember everyone, I have no children myself. I have no plans on changing that anytime soon. But I was once a child, if you can believe it. I was once a child. I don't think that's that hard to believe, really. I haven't really changed that much since being a child. But let's read a few and then I'll talk about myself. My oldest, when she was 4, she had an imaginary friend named Jack who lived under our back porch and he liked to shove sticks down people's throats. I discouraged playtime with Jack. I had a best friend called Jack when I was a child and sounds like something he'd do. I'm joking. Don't sue me. If you ever watch this, you won't. My cousin had an imaginary friend who said she used to live in the fireplace and was red and patchy as if she was burnt. Apparently, she was a little girl who wore funny clothes that looked like olden day clothes. Still spooks me out. This is what I don't get about this shit. Clearly, these are ghosts. Very clear. You can't tell me these are not ghosts that people are talking about. So, when is it acceptable to get an exorcism on your child? I'd like to know for future reference. When my daughter was a toddler, she randomly started talking about a man named Don. She always described him the same way and didn't seem scared at all, despite bringing him up every day. She didn't go to daycare and we didn't know anyone called Don. Then one day she got completely freaked out, wouldn't walk around the house alone in case she ran into Don, wouldn't sleep in her own room, and would talk about how she hated him because he said mean words to her all the time. About a year into Mean Don, we bought a new house. Once we moved, she never spoke of him again. Look at this comment reply. I've read a lot on the subject of paranormal experiences. I'm definitely not saying I know jack shit, but from what I've read, your child's experience is common. The entity begins the relationship with a child by being very friendly and then starts being a dick once it gains the child's trust. It can progress in some pretty upsetting stuff. You moved at the right time. Sounds like classic narcissistic behaviour. So are all narcissists just ghosts that are hella mad all the time? My son had this imaginary friend, Ganga. She lived in the nearby pond, had duck feet, hair all over her face, ate for a slit in her neck, and we were expecting her any minute for dinner. He was totally chill with this horrific monster idea, yet he had recurring nightmares about a puppy coming into his room. Kids are weird. I never had an imaginary friend. I didn't even have any real friends. Which is not true, actually. Had a few friends. Sorry, I was trying to be relatable. I'm kidding. I get really odd at this time of night, I swear. I never had any imaginary friends, though. So when children talk about imaginary friends, like, can they actually see something there, or is it in their head? I mean, technically, everything we see is our brain interpreting all around us. So everything we see is only really ever in our heads. But you know what I mean? Are children seeing, like, is an imaginary friend there? My son stopped talking to his imaginary friend for months after my nephew, who was 15, took his own life. My son, who was not quite 5, was the apple of his eye. My nephew treated my son like a little brother, and since his mum watched my son while I worked, they spent lots of time together. I had simply told my son his cousin was sick from sadness and he'd died. I would remind him every time before he went to the house so he wouldn't pester my sister about where he was. One day he said, "Mum, you keep saying he's not there anymore, but he is. He sits on my bed before I go to sleep and talks to me." He would not be dissuaded. This went on for months. He knew things we'd not speak about around him when that happened. My nephew's grandpa on his dad's side passed a few months later. That's when my son told me his cousin said he wouldn't be able to visit anymore. He was going on a train with his grandpa and they wouldn't come back again. Last thing he told him was to never play with guns, they weren't safe. My nephew took his life with a handgun. Wigged me the hell out. That is clearly a paranormal experience. Oh, I know that some people would try and rationalize it as it's the child trying to rationalize a grief. But how aware? Well, children are a lot more perceptive than people do give them credit for, sure. But Occam's razor, simplest explanation, is this is a paranormal experience. So maybe not scary, but definitely weird. When I was little, I claimed to have an imaginary friend who had light brown hair and wore a nightgown. She had stars for eyes. Well, my niece was living at my old childhood home, and she told me that she has a friend who misses me, and she asked why I went away. I asked who. She described my old imaginary friend. It was super spooky. How can you be around kids when they say shit like this? That is creepy. Come on then, what's the rational explanation for that? Look, I am a woman of science and rationality 60% of the time. How can you rationalize that? A kid said he didn't want to go to church because my invisible friend says he can't follow in there. That's a demon. That's just a demon. I am giving myself a headache by yelling. I'm talking to Miss Lady. Who's Miss Lady? The white lady with black eyes and long fingernails. Cue me searching for the nearest exorcist. Sounds like, was it Samara from The Ring? My son was 2. He started to cry in the middle of the night and say an orange doggy was under his cot. This went on for at least a month. He would describe the orange doggy as having sharp teeth, stealing his dummies and biting his lips and face until there was blood. He's 16 now and still remembers it vividly. I need to know, like, can people actually see them? Purple mummy. When my son was first learning to talk, he would tell us about something called purple mummy. First learning to talk and already starting with that paranormal shit. How can you send a child back to the womb? It could be an imaginary friend, but these details are a little bit creepy. Here's a few of the purple mummy details. Purple mummy is all purple with long hair and bright all white eyes. At the time he mixed up purple with black, so you could have meant she was all black. Purple mummy picks him up at night and turns off the lights. We would often find my son out of his crib in the morning, which would mean him crawling over the railing into the ground at a time when he was barely walking. Definitely found the lights off in it. Oh no, why am I reading this at 1 a.m? I'm going to get scared. I'm going to have to get Keanu the rat out in a minute. I'm just going to have to hold my rat. Just really stop saying things like that. Definitely found the lights in his room off a few times too, even though he's afraid of the dark. Purple mummy needs a bandage because she has blood everywhere. Purple mummy has no smile, meaning a mouth. Purple mummy can take her head off. Purple mummy really doesn't like daddy. He told us all of this stuff for maybe a year or a little more. If we ever asked where she was, he'd always point to the same spot. A corner of the room behind his open closet door. He would also wake up crying almost every night during this time. Once during a really rough night, my wife went to ask him what's wrong, and his answer was, "Purple mummy won't let me sleep." My youngest sister, 4 at the time, had an imaginary friend called Paris Jarris. Or is that Yaris? Jarris or Yaris? Paris Yaris. My dad had built her a small playhouse in our backyard where my mum could see and hear her while she was in the kitchen. My sister would have tea parties and such with her imaginary friend. I never had this. I never had any imaginary friends to have tea parties with. I don't think I even had tea parties. I don't know, man. I was a bit of a strange kid. For the longest time, I wanted to be a werewolf when I was a child. And I went through this. Why am I saying this on the internet for it to haunt me forever? I went through this phase of praying to aliens to come and abduct me because I was bored of this earth and the people and school, not much has changed apart from the school aspect, so. Because now learning is fun with Skillshare. One day, Mum heard her say, "Don't worry, as long as I'm alive, they won't hurt you." She paused and said, "Well, if you do that, then I can't help you. It's not nice to kill people." When my mum asked her what that was about, my sister said, "Sometimes I have to tell Paris to be a nice person or you can't visit anymore." We moved not too long afterwards, she didn't get a new playhouse. Paris Yaris is a top tier name. Kids say weird shit. My mother-in-law asked my 3-year-old what she would do if a bad guy talked to her. Her response was that she would cut off his skin. My father-in-law asked, weirdly, what she would do with his skin, and my daughter replied that she would give it to my dad so he could wear it. Absolutely no clue where she got this from, but apparently she was some sort of torturer in her last life. She would do it too. Most of my extended family live around the same area, so we have a lot of gatherings. For the backstory, one of my uncles, let's call him Steve, lost a childhood friend when he was 7. Steve and his friend, let's call him Jack, were having a play date one afternoon and got a bit dirty in some mud. So Steve's mother gave Jack a pair of shoes to borrow. When Jack's father came to pick him up after the play date, they forgot to put back on Jack's shoes, and Jack accidentally got in the car with the borrowed shoes still on. Tragically, the father and Jack got into a terrible car crash on the way home, which killed the 7-year-old Jack. The family had him buried in the shoes he had borrowed from Steve. I'm not sure why. Fast forward 30 years later to a family gathering in 2010. My 6-year-old cousin Sarah is playing alone with some toys in the quieter room of the house. My uncle Steve comes up to her and asks what she is playing. Sarah responds saying that she is playing with a friend. Holding back a smile, Steve asks who her imaginary friend was. Sarah continues to play while saying she was playing with his friend Jack and that he is sorry he forgot to give you back your shoes. My uncle's jaw nearly dropped. He has not talked about Jack in years, let alone that story to a 6-year-old. No one had brought up Jack that day, nor at any family gathering recently. Every time I remember this incident, I get chills. Listen, I'm all for science, but sometimes you need to accept that these experiences are ghosts. When my son was 3 to 4, he started talking about his wife. He would say she was outside and very sad. I remember him putting his hand on his heart and saying he missed her, but we couldn't let her in. She needed to move on. Kids are creepy. Kids are so creepy. I have a younger relative who used to talk about her imaginary friend, Mrs. Mim. Mrs. Mim looks down on everyone, not because she's arrogant, because she is always floating up high in the ceiling. Mrs. Mim is always wearing her favourite white dress and holding a big clear towel, aka a wedding dress and veil. Mrs. Mim's neck is always bent. Mrs. Mim cries a lot. Mrs. Mim hates our grandma. Why did I start doing this video? I hate it. Mrs. Mim hates our grandma. When we mentioned this to Grandma, she told us she had a friend who hanged herself in her wedding dress after her groom left her at the altar. I asked that same relative if she remembers Mrs. Mim, but all she could recall was that weird crying she heard sometimes. Well, okay then. Oh, God. Did the groom who left her at the altar happen to be your grandfather by chance, or was your grandmother having an affair with the bride's husband? No and no. This was after World War II, and my grandma was already married to my grandpa. The friend was jealous and was the only one not married out of their group. That's what I needed to know. Was grandma a hussy? My boss has a stepdaughter who likes to talk about her brother all the time and how he's a bad boy who likes to play with fire. She's an only child. Not my story. I read it in a Mumsnet thread about creepy imaginary friends. Side note, I should totally do a video about Mumsnet, because Mumsnet is just, it's just funny. Once my mate went onto a Mumsnet forum because I think he either wanted to be able to get to sleep better, something to that extent, yeah. And after reading a few of the threads for a few hours, he came out and he was like, "Oh, maybe I should try essential oils." Anyway, Mumsnetter had a 6 to 7-year-old lad, if I recall correctly, who had this imaginary friend who started out quite normal, but then began telling the boy he didn't like his mum and dad. The son freely told the mum this, and then was whispering ideas to him about hurting or upsetting his mum and the pets. The Mumsnetter decided to not make a big deal out of it, but tried to discourage chat about the imaginary friend. She could always tell if her son thought the imaginary friend was there, as he had a certain uncomfortable look at times. Meal times when they were all together at tech. Sometimes she would ask, and the son would say, "He's in the hall and won't come in because you're here. He's told me to try and bite you." The OP would have felt watched from the hall, feel an atmosphere, etc. Unbeknownst to her son, upon the advice of a friend, she tried sprinkling salt across doorways, herb cleansing and saying prayers. See, this is so Mumsnet. And the whole atmosphere in the house lightened. A couple of days later, while her son was playing happily in the living room, she couldn't stand the suspense anymore and asked, "Is imaginary friend's name not here?" Son said no, and I'm a bit glad. OP, trying to keep it light, said, "Well, that's good then." Son said, and this is the bit that gave me the right heebie-jeebies when I first read it, "But he's just out there," points to the front of the house, "and he's watching us through the window." No, I'm done with this video because I feel like I'm being watched. I always feel like I'm being watched though. Maybe it's just because I'm a narcissist. Who knows? If you enjoyed this video, do remember to like, comment, subscribe. I make new videos whenever I feel like it. Follow me on Instagram. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you next time. Hopefully I get to sleep tonight. Bye! Okay, one more, because after I did my outro, I actually continued reading the Reddit thread and I found this. So this is actually my story of when I was a kid. I had an imaginary friend named Derek who was a carbon copy of me. We were completely identical. I played with Derek for years, longer than what normal kids do. But he would always look at my mum and my older sister with a sense of sadness. Eventually, he went away. 23 years later, I'm digging through my mum's safe to grab some paperwork she's kept for me, and I see a stillborn death certificate for a boy named Derek who shared my birthday. It was only then I found out I was actually a twin, and my twin, Derek, died during birth. Creepy, right? You have a vivid memory of your imaginary friend, as if he was physically beside you in your memory? Yeah, along with keeping the imaginary friend until I was like 10 or 11, older than other kids, so it helps with remembering it. I rest my case. See you next time.